With what used to be known as E3 season wrapping up, I want to take a look at what Xbox and PlayStation both had to show at their recent showcases. Xbox obviously was actually a part of SGF, kind of closing out that whole week with their own press conference this past Sunday, and PlayStation did a showcase a couple weeks back. And I just want to talk about what these two showcases really show as far as what each of these companies are currently focused on, maybe talk about some of the things that haven't been mentioned in these showcases that are worth covering as well, along with some other rumors and things going on in the cycle for what is ahead for both of them. One of the things I want to touch on right away first, though, is the idea that, honestly, I feel like these two companies are more and more going in different directions. This is something I've been talking about basically ever since Phil Spencer actually even took over, in terms of the priorities each one has. It's very easy to think about PlayStation and Xbox as being direct competitors in the context of they both have home console systems. There are a lot of games that are multi-platform shared across both of them. Power-wise, they are much closer compared to other options out there like the Switch, and so oftentimes I think people really want to try and compare them head-to-head directly in terms of what they're trying to do, and I don't think that's entirely accurate, and these recent showcases, I think, help to highlight that especially. Let's start with PlayStation. I think the three primary goals or things to look at are live service games, single-player focused games, and hardware. On the live service side of things, this is actually the thing that I think had the strongest presence at their last showcase. They revealed a total of 4 games, all ripe for live action services, many of which we didn't actually even get to see actual gameplay of. We just got the kind of cinematic trailer pitch for each one, whether that's for Fair Game, Helldivers 2, Bungie bringing back Marathon. All of these are multiplayer focused games, and based on PlayStation's kind of recent quotes about their focus on multiplayer, they want to take it in a more live service oriented direction. In fact, this is even why they entered a partnership with Bungie in the first place, right? They talked to Bungie saying, hey, we want to learn from you examples of how to run a live service game, and we're clearly starting to see that influence right now with this slew of games that announced. Not only that, but there was also the Last of Us Part 2 Factions game that we've all been very curious about. That sounds like it's been on the back burner for a little while now and being worked on further after Bungie's involvement in terms of how they think the game should be shaped as a live service multiplayer title. And I don't personally think that live service game is necessarily a bad word. Some people hear that and immediately just get their back uptight, but I will say that it is a very crowded segment to be a part of, and ultimately, as far as any given user out there goes, there's only so many live service games an individual person can really keep up with. And so I'm very curious what this approach of having this many all be under first-party studios simultaneously going on is going to end up working out for them. Now, as for the single-player side of things, this has been a traditional focus for PlayStation, but it did not have quite as big of a focus at this last showcase. Obviously, the Spider-Man 2 gameplay at the end of the show was, I think, the really heavy focus for this. Also announcing that Metal Gear Solid Delta was a thing that is happening, and there were smatterings of other single-player games there as well, but as far as the first-party side of things go, Spider-Man was definitely the big focus. We do, of course, however, know that there are other single-player games that are currently in development. Wolverine, after all, was announced last year, and we have not heard an update on yet. Probably have to wait for Spider-Man 2 to come out first, given that it's also Insomniac. There have been plenty of rumors about a follow-up to Ghost of Tsushima, whether that is something that is a direct sequel or in the same style of. Obviously, Sucker Punch needs to be working on something. Could always surprise us with a new Sly Cooper, but I think at this rate, they're going to lean a little more into that Ghost of Tsushima direction. And obviously, there are a lot of other major first-party studios underneath PlayStation that are either, for instance, Naughty Dog has said they do have a single-player project in the works right now, and with Santa Monica Studio, God of War Ragnarok came out last year, which is obviously a big thing to celebrate, and I'm sure there is already some other project in the works there. I will say that I wish there was maybe a little more focus on this aspect of things at their showcase itself. Obviously, they have these studios available and there's more stuff in the works, but the balance of that last showcase bent so more in the direction of either third-party companies or live service games that are now just being announced in the early stages. Not something I vibed incredibly strong with. One other emphasis, though, lately is hardware. Now, the one thing that we know for a fact is happening is that Project Q is something releasing later this year, offering a handheld method of playing your PS5 games, not natively on the device itself, but via stream play and remote playing your system. Now, before Project Q was officially revealed, there were leaks talking about the existence of this device being a thing, and the same person who covered that has also had a lot of rumors in regards to additional PlayStation hardware in the way, particularly a slimline revision sometime later this year, and a Pro system late next year. Now, I will say I've always been very skeptical of the idea of a PS5 Pro. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me because during the PS4 and Xbox One era, the main pitch there was, hey, we can add 4K support. For this era, obviously there's always room for power upgrades, but I just don't know how they're going to market it in terms of just being the better version of the current system, what that's going to do for development cycles as far as profiles for each one. if it is a thing that is real, I'm really curious what that landscape is going to look like. Now, by comparison, Xbox's most recent showcase was, maybe surprisingly, maybe not, very single-player focused across the board, and all of that, of course, tying into the concept of Game Pass. There were some multiplayer things here and there, mostly updates for stuff we already know about, for instance, Sea of Thieves getting a Monkey Island update, but when you look at the vast majority of titles that were covered and talked about at their show, both first-party and third-party, it was a lot of single-player. Fable, South of Midnight, Star Wars, Outcast, all the games that were the opening acts were single-player games. A lot of brand new titles from first-party companies like Towerborn and Clockwork Revolution, single-player games. All the Atlas games that were revealed that are coming to Game Pass are going to be single-player games. Again, multiplayer wasn't completely non-existent. There were other titles like 33 Immortals, but overall, the balance of that presentation was very, very single-player oriented, especially with the closing, back half of the whole show highlighting what's going on in Starfield. And the thing this all comes back to in my mind is Game Pass. Game Pass, Game Pass, Game Pass. There has been such a heavy focus on Microsoft to sell Xbox Game Pass as really being the actual thing that Xbox is now about. You can still play on the hardware of your choice. There's the Xbox system itself. There is PC where you can run the Xbox service. But ultimately, Xbox Game Pass is the main focus because they're trying to have this very large catalog of games that are exclusive to them as well as mixed in with some big hits from other companies. And what I think is really interesting about this is you look at the variety of games, right? Like I said, overall single-player focused, but there was quite a bit different in terms of tone, feel, and style across all the different games that were shown during that showcase. And this is actually one of the things that I like about Game Pass, and I think is a focus for Microsoft right now, is building up this catalog to really get more and more people invested in Game Pass as a platform. While there are certainly some first-party expensive games involved in the mix, Starfield obviously was a big focus of the presentation, but when you even look at the recent history of Xbox and upcoming games, there's a lot of more weirder experimental titles in the mix. Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush, I think, are really good examples of this, right? These are games that are not necessarily big-budget AAA titles, but they are fun experimental titles from established companies that almost feel a little bit more like labors of love. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting about the direction Xbox appears to be going based on that showcase. I don't think they're entirely out of wanting to do their own live service style games. Obviously, Halo Infinite exists and is something they did not touch on during that show. But generally speaking, as far as the list of all the games coming up and new releases, there was a much bigger focus on more traditional games that, sure, may have DLC or other stuff, but is a more focused, isolated experience and is meant to be part of this Game Pass service where, hey, jump in and dive and play all these different games, as opposed to, hey, here's this one game that we want to have dominate all of your time. Now, I will say I've seen some people kind of draw comparisons between these recent showcases and emphasize that it looks like PlayStation is getting less interested in their single-player profile in favor of live service games, and I don't think that's entirely fair. I think this showcase absolutely highlighted that they want to get into the live service business, and that's what they wanted to drive home right away. But again, there are so many studios they have already established that are focused on single-player content that I think they have a lot more to reveal on that front. I do, however, think that it does draw a little bit of a line in that I think PlayStation is very interested in either having the big-budget single-player AAA games that we have seen them do in the past, while Xbox, I think live service is a thing that they're not entirely dropping, obviously, but it is something they're maybe leaning a little bit more away from in favor of having a larger breadth of single-player titles. Something that there's definitely been a deficit of for years on the Xbox side of things, and that showcase was really trying to emphasize, hey, this is a thing we're currently addressing and fixing. It's an interesting shift because I feel like in some ways it's almost like a role reversal. I feel like there was a time when Xbox was a lot more focused on trying to drive home live services and that kind of thing, which Game Pass still lightly falls under in a sense, but in a very different kind of way, whereas PlayStation was focused a lot more on the first-party titles. And while that is still, I think, the current state of things, these showcases really make it seem like each one wants to go in the opposite direction. Also, just real quick on the hardware side of things, obviously we know a lot of plans going on with PlayStation. Xbox is a little bit more tight-lipped right now. There haven't really been any major rumors. Obviously, they just revealed and will soon release a higher storage size version of the Series S. I think there's that hanging question of, do we get some kind of slimline revision for the Series X sometime in the future? Obviously not this year, but probably sometime next year. Is there some kind of 0.5 generation system? We're hearing lots of rumors about PlayStation doing that. Is Xbox going to match and do the same as well? A lot of unknowns in that space, which makes next year, I think, very interesting to me, because I feel like we're going to start seeing the release of a lot of these Xbox first-party games finally come to market. PlayStation will be closer to releasing a lot of these live service games they're talking about. We'll start to see what new hardware is actually revealed. I think next year is going to be a really interesting time for this generation. So those are just some thoughts I've had about PlayStation and Xbox after their respective showcases this past summer. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button, let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.